May 7th, 1945. The smoke over Berlin has not yet cleared. The smell of cordite, burning timber, and rotting bodies hangs heavy in the stagnant spring air. American GIs and Soviet soldiers are shaking hands on the banks of the Elbe River. They are sharing cigarettes. They are drinking confiscated vodka and American whiskey. They are dancing on the grave of the Nazi Empire. To the common soldier, the nightmare is over. The world is finally safe. The guns have fallen silent. But in the high command tents, the mood is dangerously different. General George S. Patton, the man of blood and guts, the finest combat general the United States has ever produced, is not celebrating. He is standing by his jeep, his ivory-handled revolvers at his side, looking east. He watches the Red Army. He sees their discipline, or lack of it. He sees their brutal occupation tactics. He sees a new tyranny rising from the ashes of the old one. He turns to his staff, his eyes cold and hard, and says the words that would terrify the politicians in Washington. He says we are fighting the wrong enemy. He says we should not stop. He says we should keep driving our Shermans and Pershings straight through the Soviet lines and not stop until we hit Moscow. History tells us the war in Europe ended in May 1945, but history books often leave out the secret documents sitting on Winston Churchill's desk at that very moment. They leave out the operational maps drawn up by the British War Cabinet. They leave out the terrifying reality of a plan codenamed Operation Unthinkable. This is the story of the World War III that almost happened. This is the story of American industrial might turning its full, unexhausted fury against the Soviet Union. This is the story of how close the world came to a nuclear winter, not in the Cold War, but in the summer of 1945. But what history books fail to mention is the one decision that changed everything. The decision to holster the American gun just as it was fully loaded. The decision that defined the next 50 years of human suffering under the Iron Curtain. Before we go deeper, let me ask you something. If you're holding your phone right now or watching this on your screen, have you subscribed yet? If you haven't, do it now. Subscribe to World War II Dark Secrets. To understand why General Patton wanted to attack, you have to understand the American military machine in 1945. By the end of the war, the United States was not just a country, it was a factory of death unlike anything the world had ever seen. We were the rich warrior. While other nations fought with blood and desperation, America fought with steel, oil, and logistics. In May 1945, the United States Army was at its absolute peak. We had over 12 million men in uniform. Our Air Force was the largest and most technologically advanced in history. We had thousands of B-29 superfortresses, bombers that could fly higher and faster than anything the Soviets could dream of catching. We had the atomic bomb in the final stages of testing. The American supply chain was a miracle. A soldier on the front line in Germany could expect fresh socks, hot food, chewing gum, and endless ammunition brought to him by a ceaseless river of 2.5-ton trucks. Contrast this with the Soviet Union. Yes, the Red Army was massive. They had millions of men, but they were exhausted. They had bled themselves dry fighting the Germans. Their supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. Much of their transport relied on horses and wagons. And here is the shocking secret. They were driving American trucks. The Red Army was moving on Studebakers provided by U.S. Lend-Lease. Their soldiers were eating American canned meat. Their planes were flying on American high-octane fuel. Patton knew this. He looked at the Soviet lines and saw a paper tiger. He saw an army that was formidable in number but fragile in logistics. He famously stated that the Russians were Mongols who did not respect human life and that the United States should dictate the peace with a sword in hand. He believed that if we disarmed the German army, we were leaving Europe open to a Soviet takeover.
He wanted to rearm the captured German divisions. Yes, you heard that right. He wanted to take the Wehrmacht soldiers who had surrendered, give them their rifles back, and march them alongside the U.S. Third Army against the Soviets. It sounds insane today, but in the context of 1945, it was a strategic calculation. Patton argued that we were already there. We had the troops. We had the momentum. If we went home now, we would just have to come back and fight them later when they were stronger. He wanted to finish the job. And he wasn't the only one. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, was terrified of the Soviet advance. He ordered his military planners to devise a top-secret plan to attack the Soviet forces in Germany. The target date was set for July 1st, 1945. The objective? To impose the will of the United States and Great Britain on Russia. The plan involved 47 American and British divisions attacking the Soviet center. It relied on the assumption that the United States would provide the bulk of the firepower and the industrial backing. The tension in Berlin was palpable. American sentries stared down Soviet sentries. There were fistfights. There were misunderstandings. General Eisenhower, the supreme commander, tried to keep the peace. He wanted to go home. The American public wanted their boys home. But Patton was prowling the lines like a caged lion. He knew that the U.S. Army was the only force on Earth capable of stopping Stalin. He saw the Soviet Union for what it was, a brutal totalitarian regime that would swallow Eastern Europe whole. Imagine the scenario. It is late June 1945. The order comes down from Washington and London. Operation Unthinkable is a go. The American logistical machine shifts gears. The ships that were supposed to take soldiers back to New York are turned around. They are loaded with fresh ammunition. The B-29s that were destined for the Pacific to bomb Japan are rerouted to airfields in France and Germany. The massive U.S. 8th Air Force, which had leveled German cities, now turns its targeting sights on the Red Army supply depots in Poland. The American soldier, expecting to go home, is told there is one more enemy to fight. He is tired, yes, but he is well-fed, he is well-equipped. He is backed by the most powerful economy in human history. He climbs back into his Sherman tank. He checks his M1 Garand, and he waits for the signal flare.
July 1, 1945, the day the world changed forever. In our timeline, this was a day of peace. In the unthinkable timeline, it is the day the sky turned black with American planes. The attack begins at dawn, but not with a ground charge. It begins with the United States Army Air Forces. This is the American way of war. We do not spend lives when we can spend money and explosives. Thousands of American fighters, P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts, sweep over the Soviet airfields in East Germany and Poland. The Soviet Air Force, the VVS, is caught by surprise. Their pilots are brave, but their planes are inferior. They are flying wooden yaks and Lavochkins against the all-metal, high-performance American machines. The air battle is one-sided. The Americans possess radar, superior radio communications, and better training. Within 48 hours, the United States owns the sky. The dreaded Soviet Sturmowicz, the tank busters that terrorized the Germans, are swatted out of the air before they can even launch their rockets. With the skies clear, the heavy bombers arrive. The B-17s and B-24s, veterans of the strategic bombing campaign, begin to hammer the Soviet rail lines. This is the critical weakness of the Red Army. They rely on trains to move their massive artillery. The U.S. Air Force systematically destroys every bridge, every rail yard, and every depot behind the Soviet lines. The Red Army, massive as it is, begins to starve. On the ground, the clash of titans begins. General Patton leads the charge. The U.S. Third Army, the masters of mobile warfare, hits the Soviet flank. The Soviets have the T-34, a legendary tank. It has better armor and a better gun than the American Sherman. But the Sherman has something else. It has a radio in every tank. It has a stabilizer that allows it to fire on the move.
And, most importantly, for every one T-34 the Soviets have, the Americans have 5 Shermans. The battle is chaotic and brutal. The sheer number of Soviet troops is overwhelming. They charge in human waves, screaming "Ura!" but they are running into a wall of American firepower. The U.S. artillery, the king of battle, unleashes a storm of proximity-fused shells. These shells, a secret American technology, explode in the air above the enemy, raining down shrapnel. They decimate the Soviet infantry in the open fields of Germany. Patton does not stop to dig in. He keeps moving. This is his element. He bypasses the Soviet strongpoints. He cuts off their supply lines. He uses his air support to blast a path forward. The U.S. tactical air power is terrifying. Fighter bombers drop napalm on Soviet tank columns. Napalm, a new and horrific weapon, turns the steel beasts of the Red Army into ovens. The Soviet commanders are stunned. They are used to fighting the Germans, an army that was always short on fuel and ammo. Now they are fighting the Americans, an army that seems to have an infinite supply of everything. The Soviets try to counterattack, but their movements are spotted instantly by American reconnaissance planes. Before they can assemble, they are bombed. However, the Red Army is not easily defeated. They are hardened veterans. They fight with a ferocity that shocks the American GIs. In the ruins of Dresden and Leipzig, the fighting devolves into close-quarters combat, submachine guns against grenades. It is a slaughterhouse. But the American advantage in logistics begins to tell. The Soviet tanks run out of diesel. Their artillery runs out of shells. The American tanks just keep coming. They refuel from tanker trucks that follow right behind the front lines. By mid-July, the Allied forces have pushed the Soviets back to the Polish border. The rich warrior is winning. The industrial might of Detroit and Pittsburgh is crushing the manpower of Russia. But as the Americans push deeper into Poland, the battlefield changes. The supply lines get longer, the resistance gets stiffer, and from the east, the true weight of the Soviet Union begins to mobilize. Stalin is not going to give up. He orders every man, woman, and child to fight. He prepares to drown the American advance in blood.
As August 1945 approaches, the reality of the war sets in. The initial American blitz has been successful, but the Red Army is like a hydra. You cut off one head and 2 more appear. Stalin empties the gulags. He sends millions of fresh troops to the front. These are not well-trained soldiers, but they are armed and they are numerous. The U.S. commanders face a dilemma. The American public is getting weary. Casualties are mounting. The war in the Pacific against Japan is still ongoing in theory, although the U.S. Navy has completely blockaded the Japanese islands. The President of the United States, Harry Truman, looks at the casualty projections. He sees the endless steppes of Russia stretching out before him. He knows that conquering Russia is a graveyard for empires. Napoleon failed. Hitler failed. Can Patton succeed? But America has a card to play that neither Napoleon nor Hitler had. We have the Manhattan Project. In the deserts of New Mexico, the Trinity test has been successful. The United States possesses the atomic bomb. In our real history, these bombs were destined for Hiroshima and Nagasaki to force the Japanese surrender. But in this timeline, Japan is a secondary concern. The existential threat is the Soviet Union. The decision is made. The B-29 superfortresses, the silver plates modified to carry the atomic weapon, are deployed to England. They are not sent to bomb cities. The Americans do not want to destroy Moscow yet. They want to destroy the Red Army. The target is a massive concentration of Soviet troops near Warsaw. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of tanks, massing for a counteroffensive. On a clear morning in August, a lone B-29 flies high above the gathering storm. The Soviet anti-aircraft guns cannot reach it. The plane drops a single object. The flash is brighter than the sun. A mushroom cloud rises over the Polish plains. In an instant, an entire Soviet army group is vaporized. The shockwave tosses 40-ton tanks like toys. The radiation burns the very air.
The psychological impact is devastating. The Soviet High Command goes silent. They have never seen anything like this. Stalin, in the Kremlin, turns pale. He realizes that all his millions of men, all his tanks, all his artillery are useless against this weapon. The Americans have the power of God. And the Americans are not done. They have more bombs. The production lines at Oak Ridge and Hanford are running 24 hours a day. General Groves, head of the Manhattan Project, assures the president that he can deliver 3 bombs a month, then 5, then 7. This is the peak of the rich warrior dominance. We are not just outproducing the enemy, we have outscienced them. We have reached a level of warfare that renders traditional numbers irrelevant. Patton, seeing the devastation, orders his troops to put on their gas masks and drive through the gap. The Third Army pours into the breach. The road to Moscow is open. The Soviet soldiers, terrified of the burning sky, begin to surrender in droves. The discipline of the Red Army collapses. They can fight men, they can fight tanks, they cannot fight the splitting of the atom. But the victory is not clean. The fallout drifts over Europe. The moral weight of using such a weapon on a nominal ally weighs heavily on the West. The soldiers driving through the radioactive wasteland get sick. The victory is winning, but the cost is becoming visible. By September 1945, the map of the world has been redrawn. The Soviet Union has been pushed back to its pre-war borders and beyond. Ukraine is occupied by American forces. The Baltic states are free. The Iron Curtain has been smashed before it could even be built. Stalin, realizing that his regime is on the brink of collapse and that a nuclear bomb on Moscow is next, sues for peace. The terms are dictated by the United States. There's no negotiation, there's no Yalta Conference where the world is divided. There is only the Pax Americana. The Soviet Union is demilitarized. It is forced to accept American oversight. The Cold War never happens. The Korean War never happens. The Vietnam War never happens. The United States stands as the undisputed master of the globe. Its economy is untouched. Its military is supreme. It controls the world's oceans and the world's skies. The rich warrior has won the ultimate victory. But at what cost? In this timeline, the United States becomes a global empire, maintaining a massive standing army to occupy Russia and Europe. The democratic ideals of America are tested by the harsh realities of being a global policeman on a scale never before imagined. The hatred for the West in Russia runs deep, planting the seeds for a future conflict that might be even more terrible. Now, let's step back to reality. Why didn't this happen? Why did Operation Unthinkable remain a file in a safe? Because the Americans were tired. The people back home in Ohio, in Texas, in California, they didn't want to conquer Moscow. They wanted their sons back. They wanted to buy cars and build houses and raise families. The genius of the American system was its ability to make war, but its soul was in making peace. Truman looked at the plans and saw the nightmare. He saw a war that could last for 10 years. He saw millions of American dead. He realized that while we could win, the price of victory was too high. He chose containment. He chose the Cold War. He chose to let the Soviets have their sphere of influence rather than sacrifice another generation of American youth. Patton was furious. He died in a car accident in December 1945, a bitter man who believed we had lost the war by not fighting it to the finish. He went to his grave thinking we had betrayed the future by being too soft in the present. Looking back, it is chilling to see how close we came. If a few decisions had gone differently, if Patton had just ordered his tanks forward and apologized later, the world would look unrecognizable today. We might be living in a world without a Russia or a world irradiated by nuclear fallout. The story of Operation Unthinkable is a reminder of the terrible power of the United States in 1945. We were a giant among nations. We held the thunderbolt of Zeus in our hands. And the most shocking thing of all is not that we could have used it to conquer the world, but that we chose not to. We chose to go home. But the question remains, and it haunts military historians to this day. If we had fought them then, when we were at our strongest and they were at their weakest, would we have saved the world from 50 years of nuclear terror? Or would we have destroyed the world in the process? That is the dark secret of 1945. The war didn't end because we ran out of bullets. It ended because we ran out of hate. But for a brief moment, in the mind of George C. Patton, the tanks were rolling, the jets were screaming, and the stars and stripes were flying over the Kremlin. This has been World War II Dark Secrets. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the war that almost was, make sure you hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And tell me in the comments, do you think Patton was right? Should we have kept going? Or did Truman make the right call? I'll see you in the next one.